Have you ever tried to argue with someone who simply refuses to see the obvious? No matter how many facts you present, how much evidence there is, they remain trapped in their belief, as if shielded from reality. Now, think about the large-scale impact of this. Disastrous political decisions, misinformation spreading like a virus, fake news shaping opinions, and even determining the fate of entire nations. How is this possible? How can entire societies be led to act against their own interests? The answer to this question was explored by a man who lived through one of the darkest periods in history, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. A theologian and philosopher who, during his imprisonment under the Nazi regime, came to a disturbing conclusion. The greatest enemy of humanity is not evil, it is stupidity. But what did he mean by that? And more importantly, how does this theory explain the world we live in today? Take a deep breath and join me on this journey, because understanding the theory of stupidity might change the way you see society and even yourself. To understand the theory of stupidity, we first need to know the man behind the idea. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was not just a thinker, he was a man of action, a theologian and Lutheran pastor who lived in Germany during the rise of Nazism. But unlike many of his contemporaries, he did not remain silent in the face of the horror unfolding before his eyes. From an early age, Bonhoeffer demonstrated sharp thinking and uncommon courage. He did not see religion as a passive refuge, but as a call to moral responsibility. When Adolf Hitler came to power and began turning Germany into a totalitarian state, Bonhoeffer was one of the first to publicly oppose him. He denounced the persecution of Jews, criticized the church's submission to the regime, and later even became an active member of the resistance. But fighting against such a powerful system comes at a price. In 1943, Bonhoeffer was arrested by the Gestapo. During the 2 years he spent in prison, he had time to reflect on a question that haunted him. How could such an advanced country, filled with intellectuals, artists, and brilliant scientists, surrender to a regime of hatred and destruction? The answer he found was unsettling. The issue was not just the evil of a few, but the collective stupidity that allowed that evil to thrive. And here's the crucial point. According to Bonhoeffer, stupidity is not about a lack of intelligence or knowledge. It is a social phenomenon, a mental state that strengthens in times of crisis and oppression. Now, look around you. Think about the world we live in today. Fake news spreads faster than the truth. Conspiracy theories gain strength even in the face of overwhelming evidence. People follow populist leaders with blind loyalty, ignoring any fact that contradicts their beliefs. The same mechanisms that Bonhoeffer identified in Nazi Germany are still active today. Stupidity did not disappear with the end of World War II. It merely adapted to modern times, and that is why understanding this theory is so essential. Because if we fail to recognize and combat stupidity, we risk repeating the mistakes of the past. But after all, what did Bonhoeffer really mean by stupidity? How does it work? And why did he believe it was a more dangerous enemy than evil itself? If stupidity is not a lack of intelligence, then what exactly did Bonhoeffer mean by it? The answer may be uncomfortable, but it is essential for understanding the world around us. For Bonhoeffer, stupidity is not about intellectual limitations, but a mental block, a psychological state in which a person loses the ability to think critically and act independently. And the scariest part? This can happen to anyone. According to Bonhoeffer, stupidity is not an individual trait, but a social phenomenon. It does not appear out of nowhere. It emerges during specific moments in history, especially in times of crisis, abuse of power, and strong social pressure. When a society faces turmoil, whether due to economic crises, wars, or political instability, many people seek security in authority figures. They give up their autonomy and begin following leaders, groups, or ideologies without question. They stop thinking for themselves, and this is where stupidity becomes dangerous, because a stupid person, in Bonhoeffer's sense, does not realize they are being manipulated. They believe their opinions are their own, when in reality they have been implanted by propaganda, fear, and conformity. And the worst part? The more you try to argue with a person in this state, the more they shut down. Bonhoeffer observed that stupidity operates subconsciously. Unlike evil, which is often intentional, stupidity acts as a shield against reality. Stupid people don't just believe in falsehoods, they defend them fervently. They reject any contradictory evidence, not because they have analyzed the facts and disagree, but because they are no longer capable of processing information rationally. And this is why stupidity is harder to fight than evil. Against evil, we can fight, we can expose, denounce, resist. But against stupidity, rational arguments don't work. The truth doesn't penetrate. The stupid person doesn't just ignore facts, they actively reject them. Now think about the world today, people sharing fake news without even checking the source. Crowds blindly following populist leaders who distort reality, entire groups rejecting science, history, and even the most basic logic. This is not a coincidence, it follows a pattern, and Bonhoeffer warned us about this more than 70 years ago. But if stupidity is so powerful, is there any way to fight it, or are we doomed to live under its influence? The answer to that question may change the way you see society and your own choices. Dietrich Bonhoeffer made a bold and disturbing statement. Stupidity is a more dangerous enemy of the good than evil. But how can that be true? After all, we always think of evil as the greatest threat to humanity. Wars, genocides, corruption, all of these stem from evil, right? Yes, but there is something even more insidious. Evil, no matter how destructive, can be identified and fought. We can expose its intentions, resist it, fight against it. History is filled with examples of people who stood against tyranny and injustice, often paying with their lives, but leaving behind a legacy of resistance. But stupidity? It is a far more difficult enemy to fight, because stupidity does not see itself as stupidity. It does not recognize itself. On the contrary, it disguises itself as conviction, as absolute certainty. The stupid person not only believes they are right, they refuse to consider even the possibility of being wrong. And that is why rational arguments don't work. You can present facts, evidence, logic, and none of it will make a difference. Stupidity does not respond to reason because it does not operate in the realm of reason. Now imagine what happens when stupidity gains power. Bonhoeffer realized that people in groups or under authoritarian leaders become even more susceptible to stupidity. This is because the crowd provides a false sense of security. When we are surrounded by people who think like us, we feel that we don't need to question anything. After all, if everyone around us believes the same thing, it must be true, right? This is the danger of herd mentality, and authoritarian regimes understand this. They cultivate stupidity because it ensures obedience and conformity. The less people question, the easier they are to control. History has shown us this repeatedly. In Nazi Germany, millions of people accepted or ignored atrocities because they were immersed in a culture of conformity and propaganda. Throughout the 20th century, totalitarian regimes used misinformation and fear to maintain control over their populations. And today, stupidity is still used as a tool of power, fake news, mass manipulation, and emotional appeals over reason. All are part of the same mechanism. And the most terrifying part, stupidity doesn't need a dictator to thrive. It can spread silently through culture, media, and social networks. It infiltrates our conversations, our beliefs, our daily decisions. And if we don't pay attention, we can become part of it. But is there a way out, Or are we doomed to live under the influence of stupidity? The answer lies in how we choose to think and act. If stupidity is one of humanity's greatest dangers, how does it spread? How can entire societies be led to act irrationally, even when the facts point in the opposite direction? The answer lies in human nature itself. Since ancient times, philosophers like Aristotle and Plato have recognized that humans are, above all, social beings. Our survival has always depended on cooperation with others. We follow norms, adapt to groups, and seek acceptance. This has allowed us to build civilizations, develop cultures, and evolve as a species. But this same need for belonging has a dark side. When we are in a group, we tend to suppress our critical thinking to fit in. Often, we don't question the majority's decisions, even when we feel something is wrong. And this is how stupidity stops being just an individual problem and becomes a collective phenomenon. This behavior has a name, herd mentality, and it is more common than we think. Many people follow the majority, not because they truly believe in something, but out of fear or convenience. The fear of being excluded, ridiculed, or even punished for thinking differently. The convenience of simply accepting what others say without needing to reflect or make difficult decisions. But can this tendency to follow the group actually suppress our ability to think independently? Science says yes. In 1951, psychologist Solomon Asch conducted an experiment that would become one of the most famous studies on social conformity. He gathered a group of participants and placed them in a room for a simple test. Identify which of 3 lines drawn on a board was the same length as a reference line. The answer was obvious, but there was a catch. Most of the participants were actually in on the experiment and deliberately gave incorrect answers. What happened was shocking. 5% of the real participants followed the group at least once, even though they knew the answer was wrong. In other words, when faced with social pressure, most people preferred to conform rather than trust their own eyes. This experiment revealed something frightening. Group pressure can be so strong that it makes us ignore reality. Now, think about this in the real world. If people are capable of denying something as simple as the size of a line because of group influence, imagine what happens with more complex issues: politics, science, morality. This is how fake news spreads. This is how extreme ideologies gain strength. This is how entire societies can be led to make catastrophic mistakes. And this is exactly what Bonhoeffer realized. Stupidity is not just an individual problem. It is a social phenomenon fueled by conformity, fear, and the need to belong. But if group pressure can make us stupid, is there a way to resist? If stupidity is a social phenomenon fueled by conformity and group pressure, how can we fight it? Bonhoeffer's answer may surprise you. He believed that education and reason alone are not enough. That's because stupidity is not just a matter of knowledge or intelligence. As we have seen, even highly educated people can fall victim to it. Stupidity is a psychological state, a mental block that prevents critical thinking and independent action. So, what can we do? Bonhoeffer identified 3 essential steps to resist stupidity and regain our autonomy of thought. The first step is to question. We live in an era of information overload. Every day, we are bombarded with news, opinions, statistics, and narratives that try to shape our worldview. But how many of these pieces of information are actually true? Stupidity thrives when we accept everything without questioning. That is why before blindly believing something, or worse, before sharing information, we must ask ourselves, does this make sense? What is the source of this information? Are there concrete pieces of evidence supporting this idea? Seeking reliable sources, verifying facts, and being willing to change our opinions in light of new evidence are fundamental attitudes for escaping manipulation. But questioning alone is not enough. The second step is understanding that our actions or omissions have consequences. Many times, collective stupidity spreads because people prefer to remain silent. They see something wrong, but choose not to speak up. They realize an information is false, but share it anyway, because everyone else is doing it. Bonhoeffer warns us that blindly following the majority is one of the most dangerous paths we can take. Responsibility requires courage. Courage to say no when everyone else says yes. Courage to stand up for the truth, even when it makes us unpopular. Courage to act according to our values instead of simply going along with the crowd. And this courage can only come from one place. The third and most important step is thinking for yourself. This means not blindly trusting authorities, leaders, or public figures. It means resisting the temptation to follow trends just because they are popular. It means developing a worldview based on reflection, not repetition. History shows us that humanity's greatest tragedies happened when people stopped thinking for themselves. But it also shows us that the greatest changes happened when individuals had the courage to question what seemed unquestionable. And here is the most important truth. Only those who think for themselves can escape manipulation. Stupidity cannot be eradicated from the world, but it can be fought within ourselves and around us, and the choice to do so begins now. So the question remains, are you willing to think independently, or will you continue following the herd? Bonhoeffer knew that fighting stupidity is not an easy task. It does not disappear with logical arguments. It cannot be eliminated through education alone, and often it grows stronger when we try to confront it directly. But that does not mean we are doomed to live under its influence. The true resistance to stupidity begins within each of us. It begins when we choose to think critically, to take responsibility, and to act independently. And this choice demands courage. Courage to question what seems obvious, courage to challenge popular ideas, courage not to be carried away by herd mentality. So I ask you, are you ready for this courage? Are you willing to see beyond prepackaged narratives, to seek the truth even when it is uncomfortable, to avoid being manipulated by easy rhetoric? If this reflection made sense to you, share your opinion in the comments. Let's continue this conversation, and more than that, share this video, because the more people understand this concept, the harder it will be for stupidity to spread. And if you want to keep exploring topics like this, watch the other videos on the channel. Here we always strive to bring deep reflections that can change the way you see the world and yourself. After all, the first step in fighting stupidity is to never stop questioning.